So today we're going to be building a bot, but not just any bot, one that uses your data, so your data from a database, for example, and then asks questions about it. And in between uses OpenAI to make that answer a bit more human-like and readable. Okay, so pretty cool. Once again, we're just going to be using your data that looks something like this. And then we're going to ask a question. So for example, who is Luke Skywalker? And getting our bot to respond. However, first we're going to pass it through OpenAI in order to make it more readable, like I said. And just to prove that we are just using the database and we're not just making a call to OpenAI, we're going to put some fake information, such as this fake Star Wars character right here, and ask our bot a question about it. And because we're using our data, it should be able to answer the question whilst also using OpenAI to make the answer more readable. Okay, so really excited about this. If you're looking to learn about vector embeddings, AI in general, building chatbots, and then also using Next.js in TypeScript, this is the video for you. Let's do it. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and create a Next.js project. So what I'm going to do is select new project. And because I'm using WebStorm, I could just go ahead and select Next.js, which will give me the command in order to spin up a Next.js app. Don't worry if you don't have WebStorm. I'm going to show you how to do this as well using the terminal. So for me, all I'm going to do is choose to call this something. So I'm going to call this Next.js Star Wars bot. And then I'm going to choose to make this a TypeScript project. So let's go ahead and click create. Okay, so Next.js Star Wars bot. And then if you are using something else, I'm just going to show you on the terminal. You would just go ahead and go to a folder that you like to work with, and then just do npx create next app, making sure that this is a space, okay, and this is all one word. And then you can call this Next.js Star Wars bot, just like I did, okay, and hit enter. And then it will ask you if you want to make this a TypeScript project or whatever. But as we're doing it this way, I'm not going to hit enter, but you press enter if you're not using WebStorm and are using something like VS Code, for example. Okay, great. So now I was just going to run you through a few things. Would you like to use SLint? I'm going to go with yes. Tailwind, I'm going to say no. I'm not going to use a source directory. I don't really need the app router, so I'm going to go no. Let's go ahead with no for import aliases, and great. So that is now it. And now if we look in here, we have all the files and configuration that we need. Wonderful. So that was pretty painless, I would say. I'm just going to go ahead and delete everything that we kind of don't need for this project, okay, because it's going to be a super simple bot. So I'm just going to make this smaller for now. And first off, we're going to look in here under pages. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and rename this. So let's go ahead and refactor, rename. I'm going to call this app instead of pages because we're not going to have multiple pages. We're just going to have an app. Okay, so app API. And then in here, we're going to have a root. So perhaps let's delete this hello.ts file. So I'm just going to delete that. And then here we have items to be deleted, do refactor. Okay, and that is now gone. I'm also going to go ahead and delete the app document and index file. So let's go ahead and delete those. Once again, do refactor, and great. I'm also going to go ahead and delete this whole public directory. So this whole public directory with these 3 files. Once again, I'm just going to delete that. Let's also delete the styles directory. And great, this is looking good. Now we can start completely fresh. So I think the first thing we should do is I think we should actually start working with the database first, and then finally we can build out the front end, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead, let's just minimize this for now. So in the same level as the app folder, the node modules folder, and all of these files, so just click on here, I'm going to create a new directory, and I'm just going to call it scripts, okay? So we've got a scripts directory, and in here, well, I'm going to create a new file. So new file, and I'm going to call this load.db to load database, and it's a TypeScript file. So I'm just going to add that. I've added a file to the directory of scripts. And let's just make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to also have some sample data in here. So once again, I'm going to create a new file, again in the scripts directory. I'm going to call this sample data JSON, just like that. Okay, so those are the two things that we're going to have in here. And great, so let's go back to load dbts. Now we're going to have to import a few things into here. So I'm going to import data API client, making sure to spell client correctly, from, and then we're gonna have to import a package. We are gonna use DataStax as our database of choice, just because, you know, I use it in a few of my tutorials and hopefully you're quite familiar with it now. DataStax Astra DBTS. This is something that we're gonna have to import. Don't forget, you're gonna have to add that. Let's just minimize this for now. So that is one thing you're gonna have to import. We're also gonna have to import something called recursive character text splitter from a package called LangChain. So LangChain text splitter, just like so. And then we're also going to import .env config so that we can essentially get secrets from our .env file. And then we're going to also import OpenAI. So OpenAI from the package OpenAI. So a lot of packages that we have talked about very briefly. This is to communicate with our database, which is going to be on DataStax. This is to communicate with LangChain, which is something that we're going to be using in this tutorial. We'll talk about that a little bit later. This is to get environment variables from a .env file, and this is to essentially communicate with OpenAI. So let's go ahead and import those, right? So making sure you are in the project, let's do npm I, and the packages that we're going to have to install are, well, of course, this is one of them. So I'm just going to actually grab that whole thing just like that. We're also going to import LangChain, as I said. So let's get LangChain. OpenAI is another one, so that one, and then .env is another one too. So those are all the ones that we're going to import now just for this moment. So go ahead and hit enter. And actually, if you look in here, you will see that they are being imported, okay, along with their versions. Now, the versions are really important because if you're watching this in the future and something doesn't work, it could be down to the version of the package that you've installed, in which case you need to essentially, go back and change the version. So for example, if you're in the future and you've done npm I sflint config next, and it's imported package 15, just go ahead and make sure it's 14 like you see in here, and then run npm I again. Okay, that's just something to look out for this tutorial and actually all tutorials in the future. Okay, so great. Here we have OpenAI and its version, Next.js and its version, LangChain, .env, and DataStax Astra DBTS. Okay, so make sure those versions are the same as in this tutorial. Okay, great. So for now, let's move on. So I'm going to go back in here and let's continue. So now I think what we can do is actually get some environment variables, right? Because in order to communicate with OpenAI and with our database, we're going to have some tokens and API keys and so on. So I'm actually going to, just on the same level as the package JSON, create a new file. It's a .env file. Okay, so just .env, and we're going to essentially put our variables in here. And what we're going to need from here, well, things we're going to store are, of course, our OpenAI API key, so we can communicate with OpenAI. Other things we're going to have to get are our Astra DB API endpoint, so we can communicate with our database, as well as our Astra DB API, or we can just do actually application token, just like that. And then also our Astra DB namespace. Okay, so let's go ahead and get all these things. First off, maybe the easiest one is our OpenAI API key. So all I'm going to do is head over to my OpenAI API account. So I'm just going to head over here and just click login. And then all I'm going to do is sign in, of course. You might need to sign up if you don't have an OpenAI account. Now, once here, we're going to use API because we're going to interact with this via the API, not via ChatGPT, which is their platform. And I'm going to get my API key, which is here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. I'm going to call this demo, and I'm going to create a secret key, which I'm going to, of course, keep safe. Okay, so this is my API key. I, of course, will be disabling this in the future, so don't try to use mine. Please use yours. If you've already used up all your credits, you might need to buy more credits. That's just something to keep in mind. So that is my API key, and all I'm going to do after I've saved it is whack it in here. Okay, so there it is. Now that I have that, okay, that's all from here, we're going to head over to data stacks. So our database of choice, and this is free to use. You don't have to use like a credit card or anything. I'm just going to sign in. So once again, I've already signed up. You might need to sign in. So please go ahead and do all this if you need to. And great. So we're going to go ahead and create a database. Like I said, this is free. Just make sure to use the vector database as we're going to be storing vector embeddings. Now I'm going to show you what vector embeddings are. First off, however, let's actually name our database something. You can call it whatever you want. So I'm going to go ahead and call this Star Wars. And then we can, change this to whatever you want. I'm going to choose US East 2 as my region. Keep this the same. And then I'm just going to click Create Database. Okay? So essentially that is all I've really done. And now we're going to have to wait for this to change to active from pending. Right, so that is important. We're just going to have to wait for that to do its thing. In the meantime, however, I'm going to talk you through what vector embeddings are. So a vector embedding essentially looks like this. And these numbers, so this array of lots of numbers represents a word or a piece of text, or actually anything like images as well. And essentially gives a word, let's take a word, for example, or a piece of text, semantic meaning. This means that I can now compare the word dog, for example, to any word in the dictionary. And if I have, for example, dog or dot or cat, a computer might think, dog and dot look similar, so I'm going to return dot as a word that is similar to dog. But in fact, as a human, we would think cat, right? Because cat is more similar to dog. So how do we get a computer to think like this? Well, these numbers, okay, give semantic meaning to words, meaning that now a computer could see that cat is more similar to dog because the numbers in this array are more similar to each other than the word dot. Now, how you get these numbers? Well, each large language model actually makes its own, meaning that OpenAI will create its own vector embeddings, and then, another LLM will produce its own. So if you want to compare a vector embedding to a vector embedding, make sure they're both from OpenAI. Okay, and you can actually create your own vector embeddings if you want. OpenAI vector embeddings. If you go to the documentation under embeddings, you will see here how to do it. So for example, here is an example in Node. If I pass through the string of your text, string goes here. Through this method or through this function, the response will be this embedding. So this array full of numbers, this is really long, okay, so it's omitted some for spacing. And essentially this array of numbers will represent this piece of text, okay? So that's how it does it. Hopefully that makes sense. If you need more of an explanation, I actually have a vector embeddings video on my channel that will hopefully be useful to you. Please give it a watch. Okay, so great. We can now see this is active, and we also have an endpoint. So let's copy this endpoint, and I'm just going to put that here. Next, we need an application token. So let's generate a token. This is all to communicate with this, okay? So it looks like this. Let's copy it. And now we just need the AstraDB namespace. So let's go back here. And under Data Explorer, the namespace, we could just select default key space. So maybe let's do that. Default key space, making sure to spell it exactly the same way. And wonderful, let's save that. Okay, so because we use .env, we can now access these environment variables in this file if we stick process env in front of them. So I'm going to show you how to do this. First off, let's actually connect to OpenAI. So const OpenAI equals new OpenAI. We're just going to pass through our API key. So yes, that's right. We're going to use process env and then whatever we called it here, OpenAI key, in order to get this value. So making sure that's exactly the same, just copy paste it if you are not sure. We are passing through an OpenAI key so we can communicate with OpenAI, and that's stored all under this const now. So now I can essentially use methods and properties that come with OpenAI simply by getting this and then using, the methods and properties. But we'll do that when the time comes. But essentially, yes, we're all set up now to use OpenAI. Now let's connect to our database. I'm just going to minimize this. So all I'm going to do is define our client, just like so. We're going to use a new data API client that we imported here. And we're just going to pass through our application token. So once again, we're going to do process env, and we're going to get our AstraDB application token. So just like that. Now we're going to define our database. So I'm going to grab the client. So I've just defined it up here, right? So let's grab it. And now we can access certain things from it, such as DB. And now we're going to pass through the endpoint. So process env Astra DB API endpoint. I'm just going to paste it so I don't make any spelling mistakes. And in curly braces, we're also going to pass through the namespace, which is process env Astra DB namespace. So let's just copy that and stick process env in front of it. Okay, so this is looking good. We should now be able to communicate with our database as well as OpenAI. Cool. Before we move on, I'm just going to check our setup is fully correct. So some packages we also are going to have to install. Let's go back to package.json, our TS node. So let's go ahead and do npm i TS node. So you can use TypeScript in Node, just like that. And now we're also going to write a script in here using TS node. So perhaps here I'm going to do seed, and we're going to use TS node as the command, and we're going to look in scripts. And then get load dbts. And we're going to essentially read this file. So we're going to read that script in order to seed our database. Great. So let's just get rid of that for now. Let's get rid of this. And let's continue. Now let's define our splitter, okay? And we're going to use new recursive character splitter. And then we're going to define a chunk size for our data to be chunked into. I'm just going to go ahead and put 1,000. This is for when we are splitting up text and putting it in to our vector embeddings database. And then we're also going to have a chunk overlap of 200. So that is something we're going to do. Now let's actually go ahead and create a collection in our database, okay, or our database management system. So we want to create a collection, but we don't want to do it by pressing here. We want to do it from here, which I'm going to show you how to do. It's pretty cool. This is going to be an async function, so just go ahead and do that. And we're going to try, and we're going to catch errors. So catch E for error, console, log, we can console log the error, or maybe we can do something like the collection already exists. So let's leave that for now. Don't know why there's an M there. So what are we going to do? We're going to try something. We're going to await DB. So DB is just what we defined up here from Astra. And a method that comes with Astra is create collection. Okay, and the collection, well, let's call it something. I'm going to call it characters, as we're going to create characters from Star Wars. And then let's also pass through some other things. So an object, we're going to say that the vector is going to have a dimension. So dimension 1536. Now this dimension, we have to use 1536 as we are using the text embedding ADA model from OpenAI. So just make sure that yours says 1536 as well. Okay, and all we're going to do is just console log the response. So maybe let's save that as the const res up here. Great, and then let's console log out characters. Collection already exists if it already exists, right? Because here we're trying to make it. Okay, so that's to create the collection so that it shows up here. Next, we actually need to load our sample data. So const load sample data. Let's make this an async function. And this time, so we've already made the collection at this point. So now we can await DB collection. Okay, like that. Characters. So we're literally waiting for the collection of characters. Let's save this as const collection here. And once we have that collection of characters, we're going to do for await, and then we're going to do const ID, name of the character, and the description of the character, because that's how my data, well, that's just how I'm going to want it to look, of sample data. Okay, so of course we should probably define our sample data now. So in sample data JSON, I'm just going to make this super basic because of course this is just an example. I'm going to make an array, so like that, and each character is going to be represented by an object, which, as we know, because I kind of already wrote it down, is going to have an ID. So let's just give this the ID of the string 1. It's going to have a name, and it's going to have a description. Okay, so just like we saw here, ID, name, description, that is what makes up our character object in sample data, and here is sample data. So let's call the first character Luke Skywalker, and then I'm just going to paste in a description here. Okay, you could just make up your own, but I have put Luke Skywalker was a Tatooine farm boy who rose from humble beginnings to become one of the greatest Jedi the galaxy has ever known. Along with his friend Princess Leia and Han Solo, Luke battled the evil Empire, discovered the truth of his parentage, and it ended the tyranny of the Sith. Okay, and then end. So that is one character. And now I'm going to put in a completely fake character, one that does not exist. So yes, ID, name, ID 2. I'm going to put Esmeralda Smigu. And we are only doing this to prove to you that we're using our own data. We're not using OpenAI at any point, even when we make an OpenAI call to make our answer more readable, more humanly readable when we get the result back from the database. And then let's put a description. And I'm just going to put Esmeralda was the queen of Loopy Land in Tatooine. Okay, 100% made up. Even though tab 9 was trying to suggest some things, I think this looks good. Okay, so once again, this is an array of 2 objects, 1 object, another object. Save that, and now I'm going to go back to load dbts. So we are getting the ID, the name, description of sample data. And now we're going to have to chunk it up. So const chunks await. We're going to use splitter. We're going to split text. I'm going to pass through the description. So we're going to have to split up the description as it is quite long. Now I'm going to just write a for loop. So let I equals 0 for await const chunk of chunks. Okay, that looks good to me. Thanks, tab 9. Const, and then we're going to get data out of that. Await, and we're going to go into OpenAI embeddings. So the embeddings method that I showed you earlier, I'm going to create an embedding, like I showed you earlier, from the chunk. So input chunk, and then it's also defined the model. Well, we saw the model, right? Because that's why we had that dimension. We're going to use text embedding ADA002, so that's right. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Perhaps I should put this on a new line so it's a bit more readable for you. And there we go. Okay, we are not done yet. So this is a lot to write, but just try and make sure your code is exactly the same as mine. Const res await collection insert 1. And then I'm going to define a document ID. I'm just going to pass through the ID of the character, and then I'm going to pass through the vector embedding. So I'm going to do vector with a $sign in front of it. And then I'm going to go into the data, get the first item from it, if it exists, and I'm going to get the embedding. This is because whatever comes back to us from OpenAI, if you remember, was not just the embedding, had a lot of other stuff on that data object. Embedding was just one of the properties of that object. Okay, and then we're going to get the name of the character. So you could do name, but actually just writing name is just the same as me writing that piece of code. And then as the description, we're going to have the chunk. Okay, so essentially what we're doing is we're inserting one thing into our AstroDB database. We're just going to have an ID, the vectorization of the description of the character, the name of the character, and the description as a chunk. Okay, cool. And then I'm just going to do increment I by 1. So that is the whole thing. When this finishes, so just at the end here, before the last curly brace, and we're just going to console log done or data loaded. Okay, so once again, this is the whole thing. Make sure to pause if you think that you missed something out. Wonderful. So now once that is done, we can simply call create collection. So this thing right here. Then load the sample data. So now let's go ahead and run this script, right? And how do we run this script? Well, in the package JSON, we wrote a script for it called seed. So we installed this package in order to run this script, load dbts, which is this. So now, if I get this up, making sure that I am in the project, I'm just going to clear this for you to make this more readable using Command K on a Mac. Okay, so once again, just going to minimize this. We are using the sample data, which is in here. We're then going to essentially use it here. We need to import it, however, so let's import it. Import sample data from, and then we need to go into sample data JSON. Okay, so that should be not in red anymore. Okay. Now, we're also getting some squiggly lines here. This is because we need to add some more configuration to TypeScript, so our tsconfig file. So in here, so all I'm going to do is just change strict to be false. And now we need to allow to import, so use the import word essentially in this load TSB file. And I'm just going to do that by writing ts node and then an object compiler options, and then I'm going to do module common JS. Okay, so that's all I've added, this piece of code right here, and changed strict to be false. And now let's just get rid of that and go back here. You will see those red squiggly lines are gone. We can use the import keyword. So now let's go ahead and do npm run seed in order to seed our database. Okay, so I'm going to do is hit enter. And now we're just going to wait a little bit, but essentially we should be getting the sample data JSON and vectorizing. So yes, first we create a collection, that is good. And it says data loaded here. So now if we go back here and then let's refresh. So in the data explorer, ta-da, that collection called characters has been made, and now we can explore it. So if I click on here, you will see, ta-da, a table has been made with the vector, with the ID, with the document ID, with the name of the character, with the description, and of course a vector, right? As we said, an array of numbers to symbolize the description of the character. So now we can do vector searches against this. Okay, you can kind of do it in here. So here is the whole vector representation of the description for Luke Skywalker. But of course, we want to do this in the app. So this has worked. This is wonderful. I'm just going to minimize that. We are done with seeding our database and the load.db.ts file. So we can get rid of it for now. Let's also get rid of that file right here, the package.json and the sample data. Okay, so now that we've seeded our database, the next thing we're going to do is actually use it in our app. So let's just minimize the scripts for now, and let's go into the app, into the API, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new directory, and I'm going to call it chat. And then in chat, I'm going to make a new file and just call it root.ts. Okay, so great. Now, I think it's best if we kind of first work on the back end and then we can work on the front end. So I'm going to go ahead and do that first. Just make sure we're getting all the correct information in the back end before displaying it wonderfully in our front end in a chatbot way. So I'm going to import, once again, OpenAI from OpenAI. Just minimize that, as that is one thing we're going to be needing for the root.ts file. I'm also going to import OpenAI stream, as well as streaming text response, so that our text comes back as a stream from AI. So this is another package that we're going to have to install. So let's go ahead and do that now, making sure we are in Next.js Star Wars bot npm i AI. So that is now doing its thing, and once again it should show up in the package.json file along with the version that I am using today. So let's just wait a little bit for that to show up. And any second now. Let's have a look. It's just taking its time for some reason. I think my internet must be a bit slow. Ta-da! So there's AI along with the version that we are using here today. Make sure yours is the same if you're watching this in the future. So great, we've imported those two packages. We also need to import Data API client from DataStax. We already imported that package, so we don't have to worry about that. And again, we need to communicate with OpenAI. So yes, I'm just going to do the same like I did in the load database TS file. And once again, that is right. Thank you, tab 9. We're going to define a client and connect to our database using the AstraDB application token. And once we have the client, from the client, let's just define this database. From the client, we're going to get the database and pass through our API endpoint, as well as the namespace, which we stored in the env file as process env and the AstraDB namespace. Okay, so once again, I'm just going to put this maybe on a new line so that it is more readable for you. Great. So connected to OpenAI, connected to our database, let's move on. So I'm going to write a function, export async function, It's going to be a post request. I'm going to call it post. I'm going to pass through the request. We don't need a response. We're just passing through the request. And now we're going to try something and catch something. So there we go. Now what we're going to try, we're going to await the request JSON from the post function. And from that JSON, we're going to get messages from the object that comes back. Okay, I'm going to show you this in a bit, so don't worry a little bit for now. I'm going to console log out everything later. Now, once we get the messages, this is an array of messages, so I'm literally going to get the last message from there. So we're going to get the messages if they exist, length, and -1 from it in order to do that. And then I'm going to get that final messages content. Okay, and then let's save this as something. I'm going to say latest message as it's the last one. Now I'm going to just do doc context. And for now, it's just going to be an empty string. We are going to override that, hence I used a let. Maybe let's just put this here so we can see everything a bit clearer. And this time, I'm going to await OpenAI embeddings create. And we're going to create an embedding of that latest message. So input is going to be the latest message. And then we're also going to have to pass through the model we want to use. And it is the text embedding 002 ADA model. So once again, I'm just going to put this maybe on a new line to make this more readable for you. So let's save the result of this as something. Well, we can save it as response, or we can get the data from that object just like so. And next, I'm also going to get the collection that we are using. So await DB collection. The collection is called characters. So let's get that one, characters, just like so. And I'm going to save this as collection for our file. Okay, great. So now that we have the latest message from our chatbot and we've turned it into a text embedding, thanks to OpenAI, we've also got our collection. We can essentially look in our collection, because we have a bunch of embeddings in there, okay, a bunch of vector embeddings. We compare this embedding of the last message that we sent from our front end to anything in our collection. And we do that like this, const cursor collection find null, and then sort. So we're going to sort by, 5 items. Maybe we'll bring back 5 embeddings that are similar. So we'll put vector data, look into that first object, embedding, put a dot there, limit by 5. Great. And then let's get those documents. Await cursor to array. So maybe for now, let's just console log those documents. Of course, we only really have 2 items in there, but if you had more items in your database, then more things will come back. But for now, I'm just going to test this out, okay? So of course, we also need to catch errors. So maybe let's go ahead and do that. Catch error, throw error. Great. So we will be finishing this in a bit. First off, let's connect this to our front end. So let's do it. So we can shut down API for now. And under app, let's just create a new file. I'm going to call this layout tsx. Okay, and this is going to be the layout of our app. We're of course going to import some styling. So I'm going to have my styling just in one file called global CSS. So perhaps we should also create that. So new file, global CSS, just like so. Okay, and once we've imported that, I'm going to export const metadata, just like that. Add some metadata to our app. The title of this is going to be star GPT. And then we can also have a description if we wish, maybe like the place to go for all your Star Wars questions. Okay. So that's what the file looks like at the moment. And we're going to do export default function root layout children. And we're just going to return HTML element. Set the language as English. And then in the body, we'll put the children. Okay? So there we go. This is looking good. So that was my layout tsx file. And we're done with this. Next, we also need a page tsx file. So I'm going to create a new file called page tsx, just like so. I'm going to add that here, and let's create it. So in Next.js, we need to define that we're using the client now. So I'm going to put use client. And we're going to essentially export default home, making sure we have function here. Or, you know, if you want to make it functional expressions, you could do that. So perhaps let's do that, and we do export default home. So I think I prefer to do that. Let's also do it on the layout actually. So export default root layout, just because I just think I just prefer it. I think it looks nicer, but you know, it's up to you. Okay, so I've just changed that in layout tsx and in page tsx. Let's just minimize this now and work on this. So let's go ahead and build this outright. So return, I'm just going to return main. And then we're going to have an image here. So image is something we can import from Next.js. So image, import image from next image. And this image is going to take a source. And I already have an image, so perhaps let's go ahead and I'm going to add some assets in here. So a new directory called assets. Okay, it's on the same level as API. And now I'm just going to drag in some images that I've already made. So I'm going to put in my logo, which looks like this, Star GPT, but also a cool background that I found. I found it on Unsplash. You could just find an image, or you can take my one, I don't mind, from my code that I will share with you down there. But it's essentially stars, right? So let's just minimize that. So that is my image. So all I need to do in order to get that image is, well, import it. So import, and then I'm going to call this Star Wars GPT logo from, and then we're going to go into assets and then star GPT.png. So now I can use this just like so. Okay, and we can also assign a height here. So I'm going to just put the string of 75, and alternative text for this is star GPT logo. Cool. So maybe let's go ahead and start this now. So in order to start this, well, it's in the package JSON file, but I know it's also npm run dev. Okay, and that should start up our app on the localhost 3000. So now if I go here, amazing, this is my project. I'm just going to inspect this page for now so that we can see a little bit of what's going on. But essentially this looks good. I'm happy with that. So now let's go back here. Let's just minimize this, and continue. Next, I'm going to have a section. So I'm just going to create a super simple section like so. And in this section, well, if there are no messages, so maybe let's define no messages first. Const no messages, right? If we have no messages to display, so I think it's best to, for now, I'm going to put true. So I will say that if there's no messages and this is true, I just want to show, let's just put an empty element because I want to have maybe a paragraph that says the ultimate place. In fact, I'm just going to paste this from some text I've already pre-written. The ultimate place for Star Wars superfans. Ask StarGPT anything about the fantastic topic of Star Wars and we'll come back with the most up-to-date answers. We hope you enjoy. So that's what I want it to say. Let's just put that here and let's put something else as well. I'm actually going to put just a break element and we're going to have some suggestions because maybe you can't think of anything, so you want some suggestions. So I'm going to also put a prompt suggestion row, and this is actually a component that we are yet to make, so I'm going to comment that out for now. Okay, so cool, that is my section so far. So if no messages exist, show that, otherwise show this. Okay, and what I'm going to show is, again, just put an empty element and we're going to essentially show the messages. So show the messages here. Great. And we're also going to have a loading bubble. So loading bubble, which again, we are yet to make. It's a component. So a lot of stuff to make essentially. Cool. So just comment that out as well. So that's the section. So that's the whole section right here. I'm just going to maybe put this on the same line. And after this section, we're going to have a forum. And this is to write your own questions if you want, if you didn't like any of the suggestions. So we'll have an on submit here, of course. And on submit, we're going to handle submit, even though we haven't written that yet. And we're going to have two inputs here. So the first input, self-closing element, and a second input, which is just the submit button. So I'm going to put type submit. Okay, and this, well, on change of this, we're going to handle a change. So handle input change. And then also we're going to show the value, and the value is whatever the input is. And then let's also have a placeholder, so some placeholder text. And this is just going to say, ask me something, ... making sure to spell something correctly. Okay, and perhaps you want to make this all consistent, so I'm going to put double quotes. Great, so this is looking good. Let's just define handle submit and handle input change. So We do need to define handle submit and handle input change, but they actually come with AI, the package AI. So I'm also going to import use chat from the package AI React. And this comes with a bunch of stuff, one of them being append, one of them also being is loading, for when messages are loading. Also the messages that are coming back to us from our chatbot, the input of what we want to send over, and of course handle input change, like I mentioned, and handle submit. Okay, and that comes from use chat. Okay, so now we can also change this. We can stop hard coding it to be true. We can say if no messages exist, because we've got messages defined up here, or if message length equals 0, that means there are no messages. So now if we look in here, of course, there isn't really much to see because we need to style it all up. So let's do it. So in the Globus CSS file, what I'm going to do is say that everything we're going to use is going to have the same font family. That family is just going to be Verdana. We're going to make this a super simple amp, Tahoma as a backup, and sans serif as a backup to that. Okay, and then the body of our app is going to have a margin of 0, a padding of 0, display flex, so we can center everything, so justify content center from left to right, and also center everything from top to bottom, and for that we need align item center, but we also need to set a height, so I'm going to go height 100, viewport height. Cool, and now I'm also going to give this a background. I'm going to use a background image, however, because as the URL, I'm just going to go into my assets, so assets, and then get background JPEG that I am essentially just dragged over. Cool. Now the main element essentially is going to be my app, right? I'm going to hard code a width for this to be 80 viewport width and a height to be 80 viewport height, and I'm going to give it a background color. So the background is actually going to be a linear gradient. We're going to go to bottom, and we're going to start off with it being kind of like an off-white and make it go to like a really light gray, so CF, CF, CF. Cool. You can kind of see the colors there too. I'm going to round off the edges by 15 pixels to make it less of a square. And I'm going to make sure that all the text is aligned in the middle, so text align center. Now, we are not yet done. I also want to make sure that everything's centered in this. So once again, I'm going to use display flex to initialize flexbox. I'm going to align items center as well. And then the flex direction, I'm going to make a column so that everything's on top of each other. Now, I'm also going to use justify content space between to make everything in there spaced out equally from top to bottom. And I'm also going to pad everything out by 20 pixels to separate everything that's inside main from the outside of the main element. And finally, I'm just going to change the color of the text to be a very dark gray. So there we go. Okay, so if we save that and refresh, it looks like this. Okay, so equally spaced out, as you see, thanks to justify content space between. And it's going to change because I've said that I want it to be essentially kind of responsive. Okay, great. So now maybe let's work on the rest of the elements. So we've done the main element. Now let's style the section. The section, there's not much to do. I'm just going to make sure that its width is 100% of the parent element, which is the main element. And now another thing I want to do is actually change the class name on this based on if there's messages or not. So all I'm going to do is say that, if there's no messages, and this is true, then we just leave an empty class name. But if there is messages, well, it's populated, isn't it? So I'm going to say populated, and that's the class name I want to give this section. So if the section also has a class name of populated, just like so, I'm going to change it so the height is 100% of its element. I'm going to do display flex, make sure that everything is in a column, so flex direction column, and I'm going to make everything kind of appear at the end. Okay, so not in the center, but at the very, very bottom, because as the messages are coming in, I want them to appear at the bottom. And I'm going to put overflow scroll so we can hide kind of the messages that have come through and scroll through them. Great. Make sure that says display. So that'll be hard to see now because we don't have any messages, but once we do have them coming through, you will see that change. Now, some other things we need to do is maybe style this. So let's give this a class name of starter text so we can pick it out. And let's also maybe add a class name to the first input. So I'm going to give this the class name of question box, as that's where we're going to write our questions. So back in here, let's pick out the element with starter text as a class name. And I'm just going to give a padding of 0 from the top and bottom and 80 pixels from the left and right. Just in order to, space it out a little bit more here. And then I'm going to also get the form, so where the questions are going to be asked. I'm going to assign it a height of 50 pixels, making sure that the width stretches out, so stretches to the parent element. I'm going to use display flex again to initialize flexbox because I want everything in there to be from left to right, just like that. And then I'm also going to add a border to the top. Let's make it a very dark gray, just like so. Solid and 2 pixels, so a border at the top. Let's also pad out the top by 20 pixels, so padding top 20 pixels, and then border radius is going to be 0 at the top left, 0 top right, and then 10 pixels and 10 pixels. So just like so, and overflow hidden as well. So anything that is inside of it that's sticking out will be hidden. Next, I'm going to grab the input with the class name of question box. So that class name's on that input, hence it's all one word. And the width is going to be 85% for the question box, which means that the other input, which actually we can grab it by its type. So it had the type of submit. So if that width is 85, this width I'm going to make 15. Okay, so now they're kind of evenly spaced out. You can see they're kind of chopped off here. That's because I have overflow hidden and the border radius rounded that off. Now I'm going to give this a padding of 10 pixels. Let's also change the font size of this to be 15 pixels and the color of the text to be 383838. And then border, I'm just going to get rid of it. Okay, and for this one, we'll have a few things the same actually. So maybe let's stick the padding in here. Let's also have border none. The color of text, however, is going to be white. So I'm just going to go like this. And the background color is going to be, another color is A92525 because it's kind of like a dark red. And the font size, sure, let's make it the same. So a bit of repetition there, but it's fine for a small project like this. I'm also going to get rid of the focus on this, so this blue, and we can do that easily just by grabbing all the inputs and saying on focus of them, I just want outline to be none. So that's kind of got rid of that for me. Great. This is looking so good. I'm happy with this. So great. I think we should work on some of the components next. So perhaps let's work on the loading bubble. That's kind of a simple one. So all I'm going to do is create another directory, this time called components. So just like that, we've created a components directory. And in here, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this loading bubble.tsx. And this loading bubble, perhaps you don't really need to make this a component, but I have loading bubble equals, let's export default loading bubble, and it's just going to return one div that has the class name loader. So now let's pick out loader. Let's of course also uncomment this out here. Let's import it up here. So import loading bubble from, we can just do components loading bubble, making sure that's just one dot. And now let's style this up. So dot loader, I'm going to give it a margin. Let's just get rid of that again. 10 pixels, a width of 60 pixels, aspect ratio 4, background. Now this is going to be interesting. We're going to do no repeat. Just move this down for you. Radial gradient, circle, closest side, and then I'm going to pick this dark gray out again, 90%, and then transparent, 0%, 50%. Okay? Don't forget to put a comma there. And this should actually be outside of that. Cool. And then comma here, because we're going to do this a few more times. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it and paste it. This time, however, this is going to have 100%, and this is going to have 50%. Okay, and we can now finish this off. Wonderful. And great, we're not yet done, however, we need to have a background size here. We'll change this to be a calc of 100%, but we're going to divide it by 3 as we have 3 little items to display, and we're going to add an animation. The animation for this, well, let's define our animation down here. So at keyframes, let's call this loading. So now we already have an animation name. I'm going to stick that here. It's going to last for 1 second. It's going to be infinite and linear. And the animation essentially is going to start at 33%. Background size, calc 100% over 3, 0%, calc 100% over 3, 100%, calc 100% over 3, 100%. So that's our first animation at 33%. I'm just going to copy this out and just change some of these. So now it will be at 50% and the final one will be at 66%. We're going to keep this the same, change this to be 100, change this to be 100. This will change to be 0. This will stay at 100 and this will be 0 now. Okay. So that's essentially my loader. Here's my loading bubble. And that should be shown in the messages. So maybe let's just change this to be false so we can see it. And ta-da! So that's what it looks like. This is looking good. So let's just put that back for now. Okay, so we've done a lot. Next thing, maybe let's show the prompt suggestions. So let's make another component called prompt suggestion row. So in here, new file, prompt suggestion row tsx. Let's add it. Let's define it. So const prompt suggestion row. And we'll do export default prompt suggestion row. And of course, we're going to return something. While we're at it, perhaps let's do the other one. So we're going to have an actual prompt suggestion. So let's make a new file, prompt suggestion tsx. Let's add that. I'm just going to basically get the prompt suggestion row, paste this like so, get rid of the row, and there we go. So let's just return a div here for now. Okay, so let's get rid of a bunch of things. Let's get rid of the root. Let's go back to our prompt suggestion row. Okay, so for now, I'm just going to return an empty element. Now, our prompt suggestion row, for this, I'm actually going to import our prompt suggestion from, let's get rid of that suggestion because it wasn't very good. And we're just going to get it from prompt suggestion. So in here, well, let's actually maybe write some prompts. So let's define them, const prompts equal, and then let's have an array. So for example, we can have who was Luke Skywalker. We can have what is Tatooine. We can have who is Esmeralda, which is our fake character. So now that we have our prompts, including, one of our fake character, essentially we can map them onto our prompt suggestions. So let's maybe make this a div, okay? Let's give it a closing element, and I'm gonna actually give this a class name too, so we can style it up. So class name, prompt suggestion row. And now we're gonna get the prompt and we're gonna map each prompt onto the prompt suggestion, passing through a key, which essentially we're just going to have an index number, okay, because we don't have a way of defining that prompt, so this doesn't really exist, so I'm going to use an underscore here. So now I'm just going to use that as the key, and as the prompt, well, yeah, we could just pass that through like so. We can, maybe to make it a little bit more clear, the prop of the prompt suggestion is going to take the prompt. So on the prompt suggestion here, we're going to have text like so we can use it. Okay, so now we'll get rid of the squiggly line. Great. Now on click, we essentially want to use this prompt, right? So we're going to handle this on click. On click, we're going to handle this click of what happens when we hit this prompt suggestion. And we essentially want to save the text somewhere, right? But we probably want to save it in the page file. So for this, I'm going to actually prompt click, define the function on the page file. So we're going to pass this through. And of course, like I said, we're going to just take the prompt. So pass through the prompt. But this function, so we're going to pass it through from here. Okay, so let's uncomment that out. And once again, I'm just going to pass that through on prompt click, just like so. So now let's go ahead and import this, right? So import prompt suggestion row from components prompt suggestion row. And we also have to define the on prompt click. Okay, so once again, the on prompt click now should leave here. So let's go ahead and do that here. Const on prompt click. We're going to take whatever the prompt was passed through, and then we're just going to get the message and essentially append a new message to all the messages. We're going to give it a random UUID. So for this, I'm going to use crypto random UUID. So that'll give us a totally random unique identifier. And then as the content, we're going to have just the prompt. And then we're going to define the role just as user, right? Because we are the user. Okay? So essentially whatever prompt I chose, right? So if I chose this one in the prompt suggestion row, on the click, I would have passed through who is Mesmeraldo into the onPrompt click function, which I've passed through into here, from here. So here it is. And then that text of who is Esmeralda will be put in here in this object which I've created, and I'm going to append it to all the messages using append from useChat. Okay, great. So I've now appended that message. I also need to define this type, as this is TypeScript. So I've just defined the type as message. We're going to have to import that, however. So let's import message from AI, just like so. Great. Oops, delete this. Make sure it's like that. And that is now done. I'm happy with that. Now, to stop this being called immediately, we need to make this a callback function. So I just need to go ahead and add this. And great. I'm just going to add tsignore just to get rid of that TypeScript error for now. Okay, so great. So now if we want to just console log that out, I'm just going to console log the prompt so we can see. And then let's go back in here and actually style up the prompt suggestion. So the prompt suggestion, like I said, we're passing through the text, but we actually need to kind of show it. Instead of maybe returning a div, let's just return back a button like so. So here is my button, and the button is just going to have the text like so. And for this, again, I'm just going to pass through the on click, because on click of this, we want to trigger the on click on the suggestion row. Great. So this is looking good. I'm also going to add a class name to this so we can start this up a little bit further. So class name prompt suggestion button. So now let's start this up. I'm just going to go down here and get that prompt suggestion button, because at the moment, if we look in here, it just looks like this. We don't need this anymore. And now let's style up our prompt suggestion button. So I'm just going to give a margin of 8 pixels, a padding of 8 pixels, a font size of 15 pixels, border none, a background color of white, so I'm just going to do that, a border radius of 10 pixels. Let's do a color. I'm going to go with 383838, and then a box shadow as well. So box shadow, and this one is just going to be 959 DA 5330, x-axis 8 pixels, y-axis 24 pixels blur. Okay, make sure that says pixels. So that's what our boxes look like at the moment. They look so much better. I'm really happy with this. Okay, this is looking good. Right, let's continue. So let's go back to our page now. And let's scroll down here. Maybe to make things a little less confusing, let's rename this to handle prompt, so that we know that we are passing through the function handle prompt into the on prompt click on the suggestion row. Okay, so it's being passed through here and being used here. And then the on click is also being used here. So we are passing it through as well as a prop. Great. Let's go back to the page TSX file now. Now, the only thing we haven't used from here is loading, and we only want to show this if the loading bubble, right, if it's loading. So if this is true, then we show the loading bubble. So now let's check it out. Let's go, what is Tatooine? And you'll see it loading, you'll see a console logged out. And then if we go back here and then look at the root, so just in here, okay, so it would have gone into the collection, it would have looked in the documents and console logged the documents which are most similar to us. So there we go. We have them. There's really only 2 in here, so it would have returned all 2 to us. If we run it with limit 1, maybe let's do that instead. So let's clear that. Control C. Let's run it again. And then let's try again. Maybe let's do who is Esmeralda and look back in here. We should get 1 document back. And there it is. We get 1 document, document 2, the one that has a description. Esmeralda was the queen of Loopy Land in Tatooine. So that's great. And if we click on another one, who is Luke Skywalker, it should return back with the document that is about Luke Skywalker, and it does. So wonderful, this is now looking good. Of course, if you have a big database, you could want to return back more than 1 document. That is absolutely fine and up to you. Okay, so this is working, everything is looking good. Let's continue. We're getting the document back. However, now we're going to use OpenAI to make it more readable and return back a readable answer. So let's do it. So we don't really need to console log this document anymore. What we do want to do, however, is get the doc context and overwrite it. So I'm going to get the doc context and I'm going to do equals and I'm going to do a backtick. Maybe let's split this out a little bit. And all I'm going to do is write start context. And then here I'm going to put documents. Obviously, assuming there's more than 1. And I'm going to map each doc by dot description and join it, just like so. And I'm going to end context. So that is the doc context that we're going to send through over to our RAG prompt. So const RAG prompt equals, and then we're going to make an array. And then here I'm going to put role system, and then the content. You are a helpful assistant that can answer Star Wars questions. Sure, that's good. However, I'm just going to copy something that I have pre-written. So thanks tab 9, but I'm going to do, you are an AI assistant answer questions about Star Wars. Format responses using Markdown where applicable. Let's also make this backticks as we want to add some code because we're also going to add the doc context. So let's grab that. In fact, we can just make this on a new line to make it more readable. Let's pass through the doc context. And then I'm just going to put, if the answer is not providing the context, the AI assistant will say, sorry, I don't know the answer. Okay, so that's all I have done. Again, I'm just going to put this on a few lines to make this more readable. So please pause here if you need. But essentially this is all in backticks, right? That's a backtick and that's a backtick. And that is the whole content that we're passing through. Great. So that's our RAG prompt. Now let's use OpenAI to send it over. So once again, we'll save the response as response. We're going to use OpenAI, so await OpenAI, and then we're going to get chat completions from it and use create to create a completion. So the model we're going to use for this is GPT 3.5 Turbo. So that one just here. I'm going to put stream true messages. And then we're just going to spill out RAG prompt and all the messages. Okay, great. And now let's create a stream. So const stream equals OpenAI stream. And we're going to pass through the response. And then return new streaming text response and pass through the stream. And then we catch the errors. So that is looking really good. So wonderful. The last thing we need to do is just show those messages returning here. And for that, I'm going to create one last component. It's going to be a text bubble. So file bubble.tsx. Just like that. Let's define it. So const bubble equals, we're going to return something, and then we're going to export it. So export default bubble. And then on each bubble, we're going to pass through a message that we're then going to put on a div. And we're just going to put the content of that message, okay? So this div, well, the class name of it, each message, like we know, has a role. So based on the role is how I'm going to style this. So let's use backticks. The role will be a user. So for example, the role will be a user. So I can actually go down here and say if anything with a class of bubble also has the class name of user. Let's give it a border radius of 20 pixels on the left top, 20 pixels on the right top, 0 on the bottom right, and 20 pixels border on the bottom left. Background color, it's going to be one that I picked out already. And it's going to be E1 F4 FF. Margin left auto. And then the other role that we get back from OpenAI is assistant. So we're the user, the AI is the assistant. This time I'm just going to swap these two out. So make it 0 here and change the background color as well. This time, so it's DCE7FF, and we're not going to give it a margin auto left. Now the bubble itself is something that we're going to have to style too. So for now, however, I'm just going to pass through the role. So it's either going to say user or admin, and then also the class name of bubble. So that essentially really is my bubble, right? What we're getting from the message is the role as well as the content. So that comes from the message object. So just like that. And now here, we're going to import that bubble, import bubble from components bubble, and then we're going to map out the messages onto it. So let's maybe get rid of this for now. Let's get the messages and map each message. Let's also pass through an index. Well, actually, we can actually use the index for that. And now let's get the bubble component. As we know, it takes the message object. So we're going to pass through that whole message object along with the content and the role. Let's also give this a key. So perhaps I will give it the key of message. And then the index number of that message. And yeah, that's looking good to me. So cool. Shall we have a look? So who is Luke Skywalker? And then hopefully we will get a div with the response. Great. So we do who is Luke Skywalker, and then that is us, and it's been styled as a lighter blue because we are the user. And then if it's an assistant, it's been styled as a little bit of a darker blue because that is the assistant giving us an answer. Now maybe we want to also style the bubble a little bit further, so that's the last thing we're going to do. So if anything has the class name of bubble, so that will be either the user or the assistant bubble, right? Because they both share the class name of bubble as well. I'm just going to give it a margin of 8 pixels, a padding of 8 pixels, a font size of 15 pixels, a border of none, a color of 383838 as the text, some box shadow. So for this, I'm just reusing the box shadow I used previously. 533, 0 x-axis, 8 pixels, y-axis, 24 pixels, blur, and let's make the width of this 80%, and then also text align. At the moment it's centered, I just want to make it go to the left. Great. So ta-da, here's what it looks like. As you see, it's a little bit more spaced out if it's us asking the question as opposed to if it's the assistant. Make sure that says width. Now I'm just going to go back here, change this to be 5. So maybe let's start again. Let's try who is Esmeralda, just to prove, that the question is going to our database. Esmeralda was the queen of Lupiland in Tatooine. And who was Luke Skywalker? So you can kind of add more questions to it. And ta-da, there we go. So this is looking wonderful. I'm so happy with this. Of course, you can style it as much as you want. That is totally up to you. The final look is something that you can perfect. And that's it. So I hope you find this tutorial useful. I hope you enjoyed coding along with me. If you have any questions, then please do ask below. Otherwise, yeah, just enjoy your chatbot, and I hope to see you again soon.